We've been listening to officials give an update on the deadly school shooting in Madison, Wisconsin, where at least 2 people have been killed, 3 dead total, including the teenage shooter believed to be a student at the school who is believed to have died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound inside the school. Another 6 are injured. We learned 2 of the shooting victims have been released from the hospital. We also know more information from this press conference, including that the reunification process, meaning parents trying to find their children who are at the school, is complete. They are still trying to determine a motive of the shooter. They can't tell us the age, gender, or name, although a law enforcement source identified the deceased shooter to CBS News as a 17-year-old female student at the school. They plan to give another update in about 90 minutes' time. Again, 3 killed, 2 pronounced dead on the scene. 1 died on the way to the hospital. 2 students remain in critical condition. A teacher and 3 other students suffer non-life-threatening injuries. And as I mentioned, 2 survivors have been released. I want to bring in CBS News Homeland Security and Justice reporter Nicole Sganga. Nicole, officials say they went through some of the security at the school. The school doesn't have a school resource officer, no metal detectors. What security did they talk about, and the training that teachers and staff go through at that particular school?
Yeah, Lindsay, a few popped out at me immediately. First and foremost, the police chief of Madison saying that it took just 3 minutes for officers to respond to calls of a shooting, that at 10:57 a.m. is when the first calls came in regarding that active shooting. And by 11 a.m., there were officers entering into the school, that they were equipped with maps of the school, that facility, that school had an active shooter training with MPD, Madison Police Department, in the days before the school year began just this year. So it was fresh in the minds of teachers who were part of that training. There are no metal detectors at this school, but we did learn that there were public cameras. We also heard the police chief there and school officials speak to the shooter, who we do know was a female student of the school, entered the building as normal that day, that there was no breach of the school, that when the doors of the school close after the start of the school day, they're locked. So it appears as though this student, walked into the school as per usual. And although there were no metal detectors, as I said, there was some mention that there are school officials that perform a visual scan of students who walk into the building there. It was also stuck out to me that school officials said how willingly students cooperated, that it was very clear this was not a drill, and that, when the call went out, lockdown, students and teachers immediately sort of ran into action there. We know there were 420 students roughly as part of this K-12 school who are now part of presumably the worst club in America, survivors of a school shooting, Lindsay.
And the police chief was asked about any warning signs that the suspected shooter may have displayed. He said detectives are working on that, and that the parents are being interviewed as we speak, and that they are still cooperating, and that he didn't want to interrupt the interview to get information. That's why they're holding another press conference. And that right now there's no evidence that anyone else was involved. We mentioned that the suspect is a 17-year-old female. How does that impact the investigation?
Yeah, well, certainly an unusual profile of a shooter. We spoke about this earlier, but, FBI analysis of active shooters indicate that really only 2% of shooters in 2023 were female. And of course, here, police trying to piece together, both by collecting forensic evidence on the scene, speaking to witnesses, speaking to the family, as you mentioned, the interview with parents still ongoing. What was the motivation here? Were the victims here, particularly, the teacher and the student you mentioned earlier, as well as the 6 injured, were they targeted or were they random? These are questions that are no doubt coming up during that investigation. And federal investigators, particularly with the ATF, going to use their TRACE program to look into, the weapon that was recovered, the handgun that CBS News has reported was a 9mm pistol, to determine, how did that weapon fall into the hand of a juvenile here, the suspect here. And so that, investigation still underway here. We know that this all played out in a learning part of the school. Police were clear that this occurred during a transition period throughout the school day. But they say right now the school is a crime scene, and that evidence is still being processed, and school officials saying it's unclear whether they'll resume classes before the holidays, but they do expect there to be some community events so that students don't feel alone, in addition to a public vigil held in honor of those lost. Lindsay.
Nicole, a member of the Wisconsin Department of Justice Office of School Safety had said people don't just snap. They don't decide one day to do something like this. They make a decision. They start researching and planning, often demonstrating observable behavior that others notice. Why was it important for her to mention that today?
I think it's important when we talk about school shootings to understand that this targeted violence, as that DOJ official pointed out, is preventable, that there are warning signs. And as it is often the case, we know research suggests that 4 out of 5 school shooters tell someone, whether it's a friend, a classmate, a family member, a teacher, prior to committing that act. And I think it underscores the importance in this case of how crucial it is for individuals, be they students or teachers or parents, to come forward with that information. And I suspect we'll learn in the coming days if the suspect here was flagged by law enforcement, as is often the case. We covered the Appalachia school shooting down in Georgia earlier this year. Lindsay, it was clear in that a situation that individual, the suspect there, had been flagged by FBI and interviewed by law enforcement. So it will be important here to see if there were any red flags that were missed as law enforcement tries to learn from this horrific situation moving forward.
Nicole Sganga, thank you. I want to bring in CBS News Chicago reporter Charlie DeMar, who is in Madison. Charlie, what can you tell us?
Well, police just gave us new information that 2 of those victims who were transported from the school today, they have since been released from the hospital. But as you mentioned, we do now know that a 17-year-old female shooter has been identified as the suspect in this shooting. Police telling us that they did not fire any shots. But where we are now, we're at one of the reunification centers. It's a medical building about a half-mile away from the school where the shooting happened. Police telling us within about the last hour that all students have since been reunified with their loved ones. As you can imagine, it has been just a terrifying day, a very emotional day, as parents have been rushing here to try and get in touch with their kids today.
And we know there's going to be another update in about an hour and 15 minutes. What more information are you hoping to learn from them?
Well, again, motive. Whenever we are at these shootings, especially in the early stages, everyone wants to know why, especially investigators. We do know that the FBI is working hand in hand with local police here in Madison, back at the school. They've been interviewing witnesses. They've also obtained a number of search warrants. We are told that they have made contact with the shooter's family, and at last check that the shooter's family has been cooperative throughout this investigation. But getting to the why of all of this is certainly going to be a big part of it. And again, you've got local law enforcement working hand in hand with the federal authorities to try and get to the root of some of those questions.
Charlie DeMar, thank you.